Good evening, students.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Sunil. Sorry, I had a power failure and didn't have a charge on my laptop because I was traveling to Hyderabad today. So I could not start earlier. But fortunately, I think power came back. So where did we stop the class yesterday? So I think we finished talking about the hemoglobin part, right? So body fat, pulse rate, respiratory function, and sensory perceptions. Okay. Okay, so in yesterday's class, we were talking about the hemoglobin, and before that, we discussed about the few other genetic markers. Correct? We talked about G6PD as part of the blood enzymes, and we talked about GM or IgG, so gamma globulin markers we talked about, and transferrin we discussed. Correct? And briefly, we also talked about how does hemoglobin varies with age and between different stages of us, and also between genders, what type of differences do exist. So we briefly talked about them. Today, first we are going to begin with the body fat. How does body fat actually varies? Okay, and let's see if there are any gender-based variations in body fat, and also if there are any age-based variation with respect to the body fat. And also there is a theory related to that, why modern humans tend to have certain issues with the body fat. Okay, increased body fat and obesity. The theory that we're going to discuss about. First, let me briefly talk to you about how does body fat actually is different in different genders and with different age. Correct. So when we say body fat, what are we referring to? We are referring to the particular type of biochemical material that is present in the body. Okay, so how our body actually stores. So fat content. Fat is normally referred to as adipose tissue because fat stored in what is called adipose tissue. They're stored in adipose tissue. And how this fat actually increases over time in us? And are there any gender-based differences between males and females? Okay. Right. In general, we all know this. I think when we are born, we have certain amount of body fat. Actually, when children are born, so they're born with some amount of body fat. You notice that, right? But that body fat goes away very soon. In few months, when children become, active, they're starting to move around. That body fat goes away. Okay, and over a period of time, then what happens? We start putting on weight. It increases, especially after our once we cross the uh, adolescent ages. So about from 19, 20 years onwards, we put on more weight. Okay, this goes on up to the elderly ages, and then it comes down. So overall, what do we notice? We are born with a bit of body fat, and then it goes away. Then between ages of 20 to 60, body fat increases, then it's starting to decrease. This is something that you all know, right? You don't need any special explanation on this. So this is a general trend that we notice. We are not talking about those people who tend to be obese for various reasons, okay, genetic reasons or environmental reasons. But leaving them out, on average, if you see, this is what the trend we normally notice. We put on weight during our middle ages, and then because of aging issue, we may lose weight. Okay, and most of the times, of course, weight gain could be because of multiple things. It could be your muscle weight that is growing or amount of muscle that is growing. But most of the times it is the body fat that increases. Otherwise, people can also put on more muscle. Normally, we say lean muscle. So, but more than muscle, it is body fat that adds to our weight. Correct? So, most of the times, the weight gain is because of the increase in percentage of body fat. Okay, but what is the use of body fat? Why do we need body fat? So why do we need body fat? Or why do we need fat in our body? What is the use of it?
For
Can you
energy.
tell me anything on this, Sunil? Would you like to add or try to answer this question? What is the use of body fat?
Preeti was saying something.
So
Yes,
for energy.
Preeti has a little bit of background to this, so I would like you to answer first, and then I'll let Preeti answer this.
So for me, it is something previously when we did not have sufficient food, it acted as a reservoir of food. I mean, glycogen converted.
Reservoir of energy, more than a food, reservoir of energy. Okay, good. So it can store energy. It is actually, if you see the number of calories, we can store more energy in the fat than proteins or even carbohydrates for that matter. Okay, good. Anything else? So other than energy use, other than satisfying the energy needs.
Cultural significance was also there. So in
Okay,
cultural anthropology, we learned that previously women were more plump to take care of the baby.
correct. So we will discuss that aspect. Okay, but biologically, we'll come to the cultural aspect of it. Okay. So Preeti, yes, go ahead.
So energy and also for hormone production such as steroid.
Correct. For hormonal production also, we require these components, especially for steroid hormonal production, correct? And also to maintain body's heat, especially in the colder regions, they tend to have a certain amount of body fat in order to prevent heat loss from the body, to maintain the average body temperature. Also, for that, we require body fat. So there are multiple reasons like that: hormonal production, energy reserves, as well as heat preservation. So there are definitely some essential functions for body fat. Okay, so that is why we have it. Although people tend to think that body fat is not necessary, but it is absolutely essential. If I have to tell you at the very fundamental level, so every cell's layer is made up of lipids or fats. Lipid cells, fats are a class of lipids. So lipid layer, what actually is the outer layer of our cells. So each cell is made up of these type of components. So very, very essential components of our body. But also at the other end, they can cause, if there is too much of body fat, especially bad version of the body fat, or we can call them specific type of fatty acids, they can cause problems to us. But otherwise, it is absolutely essential. But here in this part, particularly we are focusing on, are there any differences with respect to age or gender in body fat presence, either quantity or even distribution for that matter? So let's have a look at them. So there are definitely age-based and gender-based differences in body fat. So in general, what do we notice that fat deposition or the differences with respect to the fat deposition actually already starts early enough in our life, and especially we notice that gender-based differences starting to show up. So in general, in the initial phases of our life, from birth to up to age 6, so what normally happens, the number and size of the fat cells triple. So we will have increase in number of fat cells in our body, even size of them. The two ways that they can increase. The size of the cell actually increases, and also number of them also increases. This happens both in boys and girls from the age birth to age 6. So gradual increase in body fat can be seen in early stages of life. And I was telling you, even actually small children are born with enough body fat. They're chubby. Again, this could be because one, their body requires too much of energy. So they are born with certain amount of fat in case if they need to generate extra energy. Of course, children, if they're malnourished, you don't see that problem, but normally children tend to be chubby. Okay, there is extra amount of fat which goes away very soon as they're starting to move around. But otherwise, this is helping them, one, to preserve the heat, because inside mother's womb, they tend to actually have more warmer, environment. And but when they are exposed to the actual outside environment, I think body fat seems to be helping them, and also even for energy reserves. So definitely, infants are born with more body fat. But of course, as we lose it and then we starting to gain weight, and both females and males, boys and girls tend to actually gain more or less equally the same amount of weight on average up to age 6. And later we notice that after about years, 8 years of age, then we start seeing gender based differences in body fat amount and body fat distribution. Okay. So after about 8 years of age, girls begin to gain more body fat compared to boys. Okay, they tend to put on more weight. I'll tell you briefly the reason behind it, but that is normally noticeable beginning around approximately 8 years of age and further. Okay, so they put on more weight compared to boys, and here the increase in body weight in boys, when it happens, it is mainly due to the lean mass. Okay, increase in the muscle mass and the lean mass, whereas in girls it is mainly due to the fat mass. So fat based weight gain is now routinely seen in girls after age 8. There are some reasons for it. I think one reason is females have a lower basal fat oxidation rate. Females have lower basal fat oxidation rate, meaning oxidation means burning the fat. So converting the fat into energy. So that rate seems to be low in females. Okay. So burning fat tends to be slow, tends to be happening at a lower rate in females, thereby, distributing or adding more fat. And also fat cell size. Size of the fat cells increases. Numbers don't change, may not change too much here, but what changes is the size of them. Fat cell size also changes at this age. In females, that is what happens. In males, mostly they put on lean mass when compared to the females. Okay, so already we start noticing the differences in body weight, and especially body weight because of the fat deposits in girls compared to boys. But of course, we talked about, so almost same trend up to age 6, and after age 8, there is a higher rate of fat mass accumulation in the girls compared to boys, and mainly because of the lean mass in the boys and fat mass in the girls, right? Also, the couple of reasons for this is basal lower fat oxidation rates, and also girls show that increase in the fat cell size. Okay, but in people who are obese, they also tend to put on more fat cells. Adipose tissue would increase here, more and more fat cells will be added. So that is what normally noticed in obese children, but otherwise increasing the size of the fat cell is what normally noticed in the normal trend. Okay, this is in the early ages of our life, how fat actually differs between genders based on the age. Okay, but also as we grow up, the distribution of the fat also changes. Distribution of the fat also changes. The way the fat gets deposited in men compared to women is different. Okay, so men tend to have the distributed, if you see the highlighted regions here, men tend to have more fat that is being, visceral fat it is called, the fat that is actually in the tummy area. This tends to be actually more common in men. Okay, and also if you see the thighs around the thighs like this, they tend to be accumulation of fat, which is different in women. Women tend to have more fat being deposited in the abdominal area, in the thigh region, in the buttock region like this. Okay, so there is a gender-based fat distribution. I think Sunil, if we are pointing out, I guess culturally also this can be noticed. So men tend to actually put on or distribute fat. So the apple type of, okay, in male appearance wise, and females it is more like pear-shaped appearance that is noticeable. Okay, so this can be called as android obesity. This is android obesity. Okay, around the tummy area where males tend to accumulate more fat, and this accumulation is different in gynoid obesity. Okay, so more pear-like. Below the waistline, there is more fat distribution that is normally noticed here, whereas in the males, you see that more around the tummy area is where you notice the fat distribution. Like that, female and male specific distribution of the fats can be seen. Correct? So android obesity and gynoid obesity.
And android obesity means the stomach area, right?
Yes, android means this type of shape that you notice here. It looks like the bulged area here. So around the stomach area, belly, basically the belly area, the fat get distributed like this, around the belly like this. Okay, the appearance looks more like an apple. And the pear-shaped way, the distribution is different. Instead of, the circular area that you are noticing here, it gets distributed differently. So under the waist, basically you notice more fat being distributed like this. Whereas in the males, it tends to be above the waistline where more fat gets distributed. But this could be seen slightly differently between males and females, but in general. Sunil, you were saying that studied something like this in the cultural anthropology part, right?
Yes, sir.
So what were you referring to there?
The requirement of to take care of babies and the attraction as well. So previously, when women were plump, so it showcased more attractiveness because lack of food was there.
Correct.
But it has changed now.
Correct. So different aspects. Why do they actually have different patterns in the fat distribution? Okay, biologically and also culturally, or even the gender wise in natural sense. So as you rightly said, I think it could be a couple of things. Biologically, we'll talk about it briefly, like hormonal. So how hormones work differently in males and females could be one. And socially, I think it could also be something to do with the attraction. So that could be one component that people have, anthropologists and sociologists have talked about, thought about. Okay, so I will also briefly point out at the ethnic differences with respect to the body fat. I'll also briefly show you an article related to that. So this is an article called Sex Differences in Human Adipose Tissues. Okay, this is an article from 2012 where briefly talked about why does this variation is normally seen. So in general, make few points from this that as I'm talking to you. So typically for the same body mass index, because BMI may differ, correct? BMIs, if you notice, BMIs, even if you have same BMI index when you're comparing between men and women, women tend to have approximately 10% higher body fat compared to men. So for the same body mass index, we'll talk about body mass index, how is it calculated in unit 12, but you have a general understanding about body mass index, right? So weight to height ratios we talk about here and the percentage of that. So for the same body mass index, women tend to have about 10% higher body fat compared to men. Okay, and also I was pointing out with age we put on more weight, especially between 20 years to 60 years of age, we put on more weight. If you're not able to see it, I'm going to increase the font here. Okay, so aging increases the adiposity or addition of adipose tissue or fat tissues in the body in both genders. But again, women are characterized by higher percentage of body fat throughout the lifespan. So the rate at which body fat actually gets accumulated in females is higher compared to males. So this can be clearly seen ethnically as well. Like if you compare to the Caucasians, African American women and African American men, they have more fat, and especially when we go to the higher BMI levels, higher BMI indexes compared to the Caucasians, African American men and women tend to have higher body fat. So you also notice, ethnic differences, geographical and ethnic differences. More body fat seen in the African Americans and okay, men and women. So these major differences that we notice between males and females with respect to fat distribution, okay, that I was telling you, it already begins at the puberty, correct? I was telling you that. So at puberty, you start noticing these gender-based differences in fat distribution. So, and I was already telling you these points, typical android and gynoid fat distribution appear for the first time in these early stages. Okay, the few factors that can influence this. Okay, one factor being the hormonal distribution. Hormones, like estrogen hormone, estrogen and testosterone hormones can cause this. So women, especially before menopause, perimenopausal transition, okay, they also have a varied estrogen levels in them. Varied estrogen levels. Variation in the estrogen levels. Varied estrogen levels. Okay. So what happens after menopause stages, estrogen levels drop down, causing a lot of issues. We'll talk about that in unit 11, fertility and fecundity. We'll talk about menopause. I'll briefly describe. Estrogen levels drop down. Okay, this can also affect the how fat distribution happens in women. Okay,
Can
so
you
yes.
explain this particular thing from the hormones part? I'm not able to understand.
Yes, hormones part, like normally metabolic activities are controlled by hormones, correct? So estrogen hormone, so is the key hormone that is in females. Estrogen also to certain levels are present in males. But there is a higher variation that you notice with age in women. Okay, especially in after menopause and around the menopause time, estrogen levels tend to drop. So given that estrogen levels are responsible for the fat-related metabolic activities, so you also notice that weight gain that is common in the women, and as well as the way that weight distributes differs in women, different from the men. Okay, so because of mainly the fluctuations in estrogen levels, that could be the factor behind what happens in females. Similarly, even men experience testosterone decrease with age. So the estrogen is the main sex hormone for the females and testosterone is the main sex hormone for the males, right? This testosterone declines with age in the men as well, which also leads to adiposity, visceral adiposity, or normally the adiposity related to the around the belly region is routinely seen there. So this is also increases because of the changes, especially drop in testosterone. So hormone seems to be playing an important role, a very important role here in males and females. So age-wise hormonal fluctuations could be reason behind the observations that we are talking about here. And studies done on them, like remember we were talking about twin studies, right? In unit 9.1. So twin studies, I think we also talked about how twin studies are used to understand the obesity, right? So twin studies demonstrate that genetic factors account for 70% of the variation that we normally see, BMI variation that we normally see. So genetic factor seems to be playing a very, very important role as demonstrated by the twin studies. So gender-based differences that we notice, okay, in obesity, okay, mainly I think because of genetic factors. But of course, without the environmental factors that we were discussing, this may not be possible. But genetic factor seems to be playing an important role here. So along with that, sometimes abnormalities like genetic syndromes can cause problems in fat distribution. Okay, even studies have been conducted on transgendered people, transgendered men and women, and when they use, because I was telling you, I think fats actually can influence the steroid production in the body. So transgender people, when they are given with the steroid injections, fat distribution gets changed. So clearly, the correlation between the steroids and the hormones and particular type of fat distribution and the fat gain can be correlated. So hormones definitely playing a role, and genetics probably is an important regulatory factor in controlling these hormones. Okay. We will not get into more of these details, but yes, there is much more that we can learn here, like how receptors which respond to this fat metabolism also important. In some syndromes they may vary, there may be fluctuation or change in them, can result in some of these in abnormal conditions. But I think a brief idea or understanding on why do we have gender differences, what gender based differences we have in fat presence, fat distribution, and what could be the factors here. We are focusing on the biological factors. Yes, as Sunil pointed out, there are also social factors, like it could be attraction, and another component is reserves, especially in the females who are supposed to take care of the babies. Reserves. There is a theory on this, so we're going to talk about Thrifty gene hypothesis on this. Okay. But before getting to the Thrifty gene hypothesis, I think I was already briefly touching on some of these aspects.
Are we still in 9.6 or is this a new?
Same, 9.6 fat distribution. We are in the 9.6 body fat, age, sex variation. of body fat we are talking about, in population variation of body fat we're talking about. So we'll wind up the 9.6 today. We're still on 9.6. Okay, few things I think I already talked to you about. Black women, I think I was telling you this differ from white women in muscle mass, fat distribution, and other components. Here we are interested in fat distribution. I was telling you that black women have lower visceral adipose tissue. Basically, visceral adipose tissue is the belly fat. Okay, compared to the body mass index. We also talked about that. I already added points. Both African men and women, African American men and women have this, and even Hispanic women, Spanish speaking, Hispanic women, they also have more body percentage of, or more body fat compared to the white and black women for a given body mass index. So few ethnic groups tend to have differences in their body fat levels. Okay, you can cite these type of things. These differences, how ethnic based, gender based, age based differences can be noticed. Okay. So then in relationship with this, I've seen in the exam, they asked about a question on what is called a thrifty genotype. Thrifty genotype. Okay, a question had come on this. So what is thrifty genotype? And how is it connected to what we are talking about? Like, why do we actually have fat distributed like that? In the modern days, I think we see that there are more and more obesity issues in the modern generations here, and which is not very unique to the other animals. Humans actually are suffering from this obesity problem. What is the reason behind that? Related to that, there is a theory called thrifty genotype theory. Let's talk about that. So what is the background to thrifty genotype? Thrifty genotype is why people are becoming more obese, as you see in this cartoon. Actually, if you see any our ancestral species, I don't think we draw them obese. I think modern people have become obese. Of course, they're clearly pointing out at what is causing the obesity here in this particular image. Correct? But is there a reason behind it? So there was a theory that was proposed related to that. So why are we actually evolved to become obese? Why obesity is becoming a common problem in modern humans? Okay. To explain this, actually, this is one article that came in Hindu that I've summarized here. What is thrifty gene in biology? This came in Hindu in 2018, June 2018. What is thrifty gene in biology? Okay, I'll give you a brief introduction and concept related to this. So the hypothesis here, which is actually explained by American geneticist called James Neal in 1962. James Neal, who is an American geneticist, he put forward this theory, mainly to explain why are we more and more prone to type 2 diabetes, heart-related problems, why are they becoming more common in modern day humans. To explain that, he came up with this hypothesis. Okay, this hypothesis was given by James Neal in 1962 to explain why there is increased prevalence of type 2 diabetes and heart-related issues in modern humans. This could be because what is called a thrifty gene. This could be because of what is called a thrifty gene. So thrifty gene. So what is this hypothesis? The hypothesis says that certain genes in our body, certain genes, they help in storage of energy as fat. So we carry some genes which are useful in storing the energy in the form of fat, because fat actually can store great amount of energy. So they store energy as fat. Okay, they probably have enabled our ancestors to live through the periods of famine when there was shortage of food At that time, certain genes actually that we had, our ancestors had, they helped in storing the energy in the form of fat. So thereby helping them survive during the famine conditions. Thereby helping them survive in the famine conditions. So as per this theory, certain genes which helped us store the energy as fat enabled human ancestors live in the periods of famine. The same genes have become liability to us today. The same genes have become liability, causing, because now fat is being distributed or being stored, resulting in obesity. The same genes have become liability to us today, resulting in obesity, is what this theory talks about. Okay, so a couple of things. This is something that if I have to explain you, so our ancestors had some genes which helped them, kind of put on fat, put on weight in the form of fat. So whenever there was no food, whenever there is a time that they had to starve, they were using that source. They were not dying, they are able to survive. This is what the theory is. Definitely you can see some problems in this theory. Okay, because it makes sense that thrifty genotype may be advantageous to those ancestors who were hunter-gatherer populations. They may or may not be getting food on everyday basis, right? So it depends on whether they could get any food on a given day. So definitely for hunter-gatherer populations before the invention of agriculture, maybe this was the case, and especially for childbearing women. Childbearing women, even now we notice that childbearing women tend to put on more weight because this is to satisfy their energy supply. Okay, that makes sense. But what is the need for that today? Doesn't evolution takes care of it? That in evolution, that need is gone. Long back, we actually invented agriculture. Today, we have enough supplies of food. Is it any relevant at all in today's time? Why do we still keep those genes? So in modern society, where we have enough abundance of food, this genotype efficiently prepares individuals for a famine, so is not a necessity at all. So in that sense, why do we still keep them? Okay, but definitely if that is the case, we are carrying those genes. If we are carrying those genes, obesity problems that we are seeing and other related health problems like diabetes, heart related issues are definitely the outcome of that. But I think it is difficult to get convinced that Thrifty gene hypothesis probably explains it. Right? So what do you guys think? Is Thrifty gene hypothesis seems to be true? What is your opinion based on this? Because this is not something really complex. So can you provide any insight on this? What do you think about the validity of Thrifty gene hypothesis?
Blaming genes for your own doings, I would say. We have a sedentary lifestyle, and that becomes the reason. And now we are blaming our genes.
Okay. So, but genes would evolve, right? Should evolve differently. Like a lactase gene, when we started actually using milk as a food source, mutations in the lactase gene became more prevalent. We are able to digest milk as a food, right? So evolution can push it towards the direction where we actually is more tuned our genes to the current needs. So it doesn't otherwise make sense here with 50 gene hypothesis. So how a phenotype of diabetes with high negative effects may have been favored by the natural selection. If you have been suffering from diabetes or heart related problems, which is reducing our fitness, then what type of role is a natural selection playing? Why is natural selection favoring the diabetes, favoring the presence of these genes at the cost of diabetes or heart related problems? Correct? Natural selection should play against this. So there is an explanation to that. Some people think that it probably rendered detrimental by progress, meaning genes which predispose to diabetes, like these thrifty genes we are talking about today, which were once useful to us, they are predisposing us to diabetes. So they were historically advantageous, but in the modern world, same genes became problematic. So they had some benefit, they had some advantage, but because as Sunil was saying, like say, we have the type of lifestyles that we normally have today, okay, and sudden change in our lifestyle probably is making it detrimental. So through over a period of time, the same genes which were useful once became problematic to us. I think this is kind of what the thrifty gene hypothesis demands, but we have enough problems here. So I'll tell you a couple of points for you to note down. So they're saying that storing fat is better than storing glycogen. How do we normally store the energy in our body? Glycogen is our simple reserve. So quickly, if you want to get to more glucose, we store excess glucose in the form of glycogen. Only after a certain amount is reached, then we store it in the form of fat. Correct? So why can't we actually have genes which handle the glycogen component better than storing it as fat, where there is a problem? So there is not a single way, right? And we are trying to focus on fats here for energy reserves, but we have better reserves than fats, which is glycogen. So we are assuming that there is an advantage to store fat over glycogen in the body, as per this thrifty gene hypothesis.
So it is saying that glycogen is not good.
It is saying that glycogen is actually better. But why are we focusing on fat? For some reason, thrifty gene is saying that storing as fat is better. It is assuming that it is advantageous to store fat than storing glucose or carbohydrates as glycogen, where there is no clear reason except for the fats can carry more energy unit wise. And also in animal kingdom, do we notice that? Have you seen obesity, a common theme in animal kingdom? So you may say that they are not actually doing, they don't have sedentary lifestyle. They have no choice, right? Unless you actually have a pet dog or pet animals.
Of lately, we are seeing. Sorry.
Of lately, yes. That is because of the food issues and environmental issues. This is kind of a side effects of human culture. Correct. Otherwise, in natural phenomena, animals tend to maintain an average weight. They of course have that active lifestyle compared to us. Now we are more and more used to Zoom sessions. We are more and more used to, the jobs where we have to spend most of the time on the chairs in a cubicle. So definitely things are changing. Also, another problem with this thrifty gene hypothesis is we were assuming that there were times of famine among certain populations. But did people really die from the lack of food? Was it especially in the stages afterwards, where some amount of food supply because they were eating any sorts of food at that time? So is a famine a real thing or not? It is difficult to prove that if famine is a real thing or not, leaving out few regions where economically there were problems related to that. But in the ancestral species, was it a problem? And also, this is assuming that we are not adapting anymore to this feature. So whatever we had in the ancestral times, we kept continuing, but it is against the concept of evolution and natural selection. So thrifty gene hypothesis, in a way, contradicts with our understanding of natural selection. And interestingly, we probably don't have any evidences that fat people survived during the famine conditions and lean people died. I don't think we cannot even prove that, right? So these are some issues with the thrifty gene hypothesis. So once a short note came on this 20 marker question indeed came. This is 2009 paper where they talked about write a short note on thrifty genotype. So you explain, so far we talked about what is thrifty gene hypothesis. What is thrifty gene hypothesis? Either you can look into this reference from the Hindu or the key points I've mentioned is enough. Who proposed it? What is the background to this? And what does exactly this theory talks about? What are the issues with this theory? Just I'll briefly mention that as an alternate to Thrifty gene hypothesis, few other theories were also proposed. Okay, one theory called Thrifty phenotype hypothesis. One is called Thrifty phenotype hypothesis. Just to make a mention of that, there's alternate to Thrifty genotype. There is something called Thrifty phenotype and also Drifty genotype. Okay, I'll briefly tell you what they mean. So Thrifty phenotype. So Thrifty phenotype hypothesis was based on the observation that when low birth weight, so when children are born with less birth weight than average, on average we're supposed to have about 1.5 kgs and above, but sometimes because of malnourishment problems, so some children tend to born with low birth weight, and when they're born with low birth weight, seems like they have higher risk for type 2 diabetes. They have higher risk for type 2 diabetes. So it is not genotype, the phenotype that is probably making us more prone to this. It's called Thrifty phenotype, like low birth weight, which is a phenotype. So children, because of this low birth weight, are more and more prone to type 2 diabetes. So mostly it is because of the environmental factors in the early stages of our growth, not much on the genetic factors. This is what Thrifty phenotype hypothesis talks about, which is also difficult to get convinced, right? So phenotype, they say phenotypic regions, like low birth weight. But we're talking about that genetic factors play an important role in type 2 diabetes. So phenotype also is not valid as per that. Another theory called Thrifty gene hypothesis was also proposed, Thrifty gene hypothesis. So what does Thrifty gene hypothesis talks about? We are noticing that modern humans tend to be obese, or they are experiencing obesity problems. Maybe because of the genetic drift in the genes responsible for regulating the body fat in our body. So maybe drift means, we talked about that, right? Random chance of losing certain genetic components, certain variety. So maybe such genes are lost, and the genes that are responsible for regulating the body fat, such genes are drifted. So this is like opposite to Thrifty. Thrifty means famine, or when we are in the stage where we lack resources, but Thrifty is moving away. So Thrifty genes is where some genes which are responsible for controlling the body fat accumulation, probably they are lost due to genetic drift. So that theory is called a Thrifty gene hypothesis. Just know them as an alternate to Thrifty genotype hypothesis. Okay, right.
Sir, can you keep that slide for a minute?
Sure.
Just want-
Yeah, no issue.
So, like this, so for this Thrifty phenotype or genotype, there could be any such theories, like everyone can make a theory. So, how do we keep track of them?
You don't have to keep track of them. As I was telling you, I think in the literature, when I was going through this content, I was reading that Thrifty genotype is one idea, because some archaeologists, not archaeologists, some anthropologists over a period of time came up with some of these ideas, maybe different depending on their background. In this particular case, Neil is a geneticist, right? He thought in the perspective of genes. So people do express their ideas. When they become popular, those type of theories are important. And with respect to this obesity, and especially in the modern world, how we are experiencing the higher incidence of diabetes, they wanted to make some connections. But of course, they're wrong, right? And they try to do it. And when someone actually comes with an explanation like that, people who are not convinced about it, they come up with an alternate theories. Like that in the literature, I noticed that in comparison with the Thrifty genotype, there was a discussion on Thrifty phenotype and Thrifty gene hypothesis. So just introduce briefly these terms to you. So in case if they ask in the exam for about 20 markers, you can make a mention. So genotype could not be the factor. Maybe phenotype or Thrifty or alternate hypotheses were explained for that. So not everything that actually gets registered or publicly placed into the domain like this, we cannot take them, correct? Otherwise, there may be enough ideas, and these have to be tested. Some of these are tested. At that time in 1960s, this was actually a plausible explanation at that time. Today, it may not make sense to us after having enough evidences or information on type 2 diabetes, etc. Done? Okay. Okay. So this is a theory I want you to know. In body fat, I think you probably are aware about this. The risk factors to us, of course, this is true anywhere, but India, we're also experiencing this issue. So in India, we are noticing that increased susceptibility to type 2 diabetes, okay, and insulin resistance. So type 2 diabetes, traditionally we thought it is insulin resistance, meaning our bodies may make enough insulin, but our cells don't respond to them. So that is why it's called insulin resistance. But I think this theory is now slightly changing. There are many categories of type 2 now, looks like. So compared to Europeans, we are more and more prone to type 2 diabetes. Okay, that can be definitely seen here. And recent studies indicate that this rising prevalence of diabetes and insulin resistance in India, one factor around this could be the obesity. Okay, so one factor for this is the obesity. And certain ways how the fat is distributed also seems to be the case here. So BMIs wise, if you see compared to the Europeans, our BMIs are not too bad. Okay, our BMIs are not too high. Okay, but still obesity can be seen in our populations, and especially for doesn't matter what BMI index that we are talking about. The waist to hip ratios also seems to be causing an issue. So the fat around these regions, so mainly the waist to hip ratio seems to be adding, I think, some risk factor, because nowadays you hear so much about that. The heart related problems could be because of the fat that is being distributed in certain regions of our body. So although BMI wise, we probably are not, as much as what Europeans have, but we have higher tendency to develop type 2 diabetes and heart attacks. That could be how fat being distributed. Okay, we have higher waist to hip ratios and abdominal fat compared to the Europeans, despite of having lower BMIs. Okay, and it is clearly known, I think if you see the 2018 data, 2017, 2018 data on this, we notice that non-communicable diseases are on rise, and one factor could be this environmental factor like this, could be where we are prone to more and more towards the heart-related problems, and heart-related problems, especially blood vessels that carry blood to the heart, okay, arteries. So are what actually gets blocked commonly, resulting in ischemia, and those are causing the majority of deaths in India if you see in the last 2 decades. So also there seems to be a connection between the fat distribution like this and obesity and heart related problems and majority of the deaths in India. So body fat is definitely an important component. So in anthropological view also, as we focused here, so it's important for us to be aware about the certain differences in us with respect to the fat content. So this is a brief overview on body fat, why is it needed, and how is it different between and ages different between men and women, and age-wise differences that we have seen, and ethnic difference also have pointed out here. Okay, right. So next we'll move on to the pulse rate and respiratory functions. Respiratory functions and pulse rate we'll move on to. We'll talk about them. Respiratory functions and pulse rate. First, let's talk about the respiratory functions. Okay, how does respiratory function different or differs with age? and gender-wise differences, if there are. So briefly, we all know what is respiration. So respiration is a process where we actually inhale and exhale, right? And indeed, the actual respiration process is the process that happens between inhalation and exhalation. Because we are all familiar about the breathing process, right? Inhaling air and exhaling air. But between inhaling and exhaling, what happens? We have a respiration process that is taking place in every cell. So cells, they actually collect this oxygen and the sugars that they have, carbohydrates that they have like glucose, they burn them and generate ATP from them by utilizing oxygen. So respiration is the energy generation process in our body that happens between the inhalation and exhalation process. High school, you might have studied this. In this inhalation exhalation process, we have various muscles, like importantly diaphragm. Diaphragm is this muscle that is actually present just underneath the lungs part. This muscle that you see here in the image, diaphragm moves up and down. So it moves down when you want to expand the lungs, collecting oxygen, and then it moves up, so to release it. So inhalation exhalation is facilitated by the structures in our body. Correct? And a very, very important aspect. So what happens if you don't breathe, if you don't get enough oxygen? Oxygen supplies to various parts of the body stops, and thereby cells starting to die. If they lose oxygen, they cannot make energy. If they cannot make energy, they cannot maintain the activities in the body. So normally something like brain, what happens to the brain? So stroke happens when you don't actually receive enough energy, enough oxygen. Energy cannot be produced. So what happens? We receive stroke and the different parts of the brain tissue starting to die. So it's a very, very important function in our body. Correct? This is something that, I want to briefly explain you this process here. And next we'll move on to, so in the respiratory function and respiratory process, how does the variation takes place? First, we'll look into the age-wise variation. Age-wise variation. What aspects actually vary with age? So what is the normal breathing rate in us? I think nowadays, because of COVID-19, we do hear quite a bit about this. What is a normal breathing rate? So average breathing rate is 10 to 15 times per minute. Our breathing rates in healthy adults is 10 to 15 times per minute. Okay. So, but it does vary. Like when we are born, neonates, newly born children, they breathe from 30 to 60 times per minute. So almost anywhere between 2 to 4 fold higher breathing rates can be seen in newly born children or neonates, just born children. Same thing with infants. They also have higher. So neonates and infants tend to have higher rate of respiration. And then toddlers, as we become toddlers, that respiratory rate comes down. It goes from 20 to 40 minutes. So in toddlers, there's an overlap with the infants. So this rate of respiration slowly comes down from neonates to toddlers. And then from young children, it will become 20 to 30. And then older, as we get older, it will settle down to 15 to 20 per minute. So in early stages of our life, we tend to have higher respiratory rate because our lungs are still expanding. They're still becoming mature. So they cannot carry more oxygen. So that is why what happens, they actually tend to breathe faster and pull more air into the body. So number of times you're breathing in, breathing out will be higher. That is what is a breathing rate. Okay, which tends to be higher in the early stages of our life. And as we become older, So especially we become adults. So this settles down to 10 to 15 per minute. Okay. So by the age of 2025, lungs become mature. So functionality wise, they become mature enough by 2025. That is where we settle down to 10 to 15 per minute. Okay. In the ages of 2025, this is what we notice. But after that, we'll notice this in the unit 10. Aging process already begins after age 20. We're starting to age already after age 20. So aging associated decline in lung function can be felt. So age associated decline in lung function can be felt afterwards for about 20-25 years of age. So some factors, you write down what happens with age. Biologically, what happens to us as we age with respect to lungs. So what happens with age? So supporting tissues to the lungs, they're starting to deteriorate. Okay, supporting tissue to the lungs starting to deteriorate, thereby increasing the air space. Supporting tissue to the lungs starting to deteriorate with age and resulting in increase in the airspace, less elasticity basically, less elasticity, increase in airspace. So age-wise differences that we are talking about, age-wise what changes do happen with respect to our respiratory system.
What is
Second,
airspace?
yes, sorry, go ahead.
What is airspace?
Airspace size is basically the amount of the size or the air that we can carry in the lungs, the region of the lungs which can carry the air, alveolar region basically. So the airspace, the elasticity normally decreases, the space increases. Similarly, muscles which are actually controlling the lungs, their strength also decreases as we age, and thereby affecting the way we cough, because cough normally clears out the airways. The ability to do so also decreases as we age, because frequency of these things would increase, but the effectiveness decreases. Okay, so another component that happens here doing with the age process. So I so far told you that. So supporting tissues gets damaged or damaged as they deteriorate with age, increasing airspace. Second, I told you the muscle strength also decreases, thereby affecting the effective cough, which can remove or clear the airways. And then alveolar dead space increases with age. Alveolar dead space. Alveolar dead space refers to the amount of air we can hold on in the alveolar region. It doesn't get distributed. Some amount of the air is left out in the alveolar region. So you know what are alveolar regions, right? These are balloon structures, balloon-like structures at the tips of in the lungs. In the lung region, if we have branches like this, because air goes through these nostrils and enters into the lungs through branchial region, and then towards the tips inside the lungs, we have balloon-like structures. They're called alveolar regions. These balloon-like structures expand and deflate. They go in inflate and deflate, inflate and deflate. Okay, so normally we are able to push enough air that is collected in the alveolar region. But with age, what happens? There'll be more and more air left out inside the alveolar region. The alveolar dead space increases. More amount of the air that is trapped in the alveolar increases, and the less amount of air enters. That is also because of the aging problem, especially in connection with the alveolar region. This is a functional region of our lungs. So thereby affecting the arterial oxygen without impairing the carbon dioxide elimination. So the amount of oxygen entering into the arteries decreases, but carbon dioxide elimination will not be affected so much. So what are we learning here? With age, few structural functional changes happens to our lungs. So decrease in the strength of the muscles we talked about, and decrease or damage to the supporting tissue we talked about here. And amount of air that we retain, then distributing it also increases with age. So age-wise, biological changes happen in our lungs. That is why our respiratory ability decreases with age. This is a biological reason for that. Okay. So also, older adults have decreased sensation of dyspnea, or they cannot. You see, in old age people, they have more and more shortness of the breathing problem. They have difficulty in catching the breath. If they walk for some time, they won't be able to catch enough oxygen. What do? They actually have to breathe. It's like how we feel when we run. Even for normal walk, this is what you notice with in the elderly people. Their body becomes less sensitive to the shortness of breath. And also, they tend to build up more and more carbon dioxide in their blood. They build up more carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide elimination also over a period of time gets affected. They won't be able to eliminate carbon dioxide, which is toxic to us. So carbon dioxide may remain in the body, thereby resulting in health conditions like heart failure, pneumonia, like that. Okay. So health problems associated with the lungs become more and more common as we age. Okay. And also, so not only the reduction in the ability in lung function, but also diseases. Our immune system also gets weaker. We are more and more prone to infections. So what happens? Asthma, lung infections like pneumonia, heart failures, these things also affect our normal respiratory rate. So directly, if you see it, the functioning of the respiratory system is affected. Indirectly, other systems are also affected, which can negatively influence the respiratory function as well. Our immune system, where which makes us more and more prone to infections because it becomes weak. Like COVID-19, elderly people are more affected. So what happens in them? In their lungs cannot withstand that, the burden that these infections can cause. So those are the age-related differences that you notice in the respiratory function. Next, we'll talk about gender differences in respiratory function. Excuse me. Okay. So respiratory muscle strength that we talked about, which decreases with age as we were talking about, it tend to decrease more in men compared to women. So there are also gender-based differences in that. Men tend to show more effect on their muscle strength, respiratory muscle strength compared to women. So we're looking into gender-based differences with respect to respiratory function. So muscle strength tends to decrease more in men compared to women. And also in women whose physiological system works differently than men, especially because of menstrual cycle. So there are different phases of menstrual cycle in females. Okay, also tend to affect the respiratory function in them. So meaning we probably see more fluctuations in their respiratory functions because of menstrual cycle, and also because of hormonal and metabolic conditions. So their bodies tend to be more sensitive, and menstrual cycle and hormonal imbalances or hormonal changes and even metabolic conditions can influence women more on the respiratory functions. So women tend to show more fluctuations because of these factors. And also, women tend to have some differences anatomically and functionally. So women tend to show differences in how lungs are, lung sizes, and how do they function. Okay, there seem to be differences in men and women with respect to the lung size and lung function. What are those differences? So women tend to have smaller lungs compared to men of the same age and same height. Men who are of same height, because height wise also our body parts do differ, but otherwise for the same age and the same height, women tend to have smaller lungs and lesser capacity for lung diffusion. So relatively smaller lungs are found in females and a decreased capacity of lung diffusion of air. So how much air actually diffuses from lungs to the outer parts, or outer parts in the sense internal parts of the body. Okay, so what are we learning here? Smaller lungs, decreased capacity of lung diffusion we are learning here. Plus, it has been observed that the airways, in females, the airways have smaller diameter. They are more narrower. The bronchial region that is present in the females, I think it tends to have smaller diameters. They're more narrower, less width. So definitely the way they function in women is different. Okay. So slight difference, of course, because we are magnifying the differences here. So women have to put on more work for inhalation and exhalation. For pulmonary ventilation, that is inhalation and exhalation, for that women have to put on more work compared to men, because they have the narrow wires that they have, or the air channels that they have, and they have smaller, tinier lungs compared to men. So some gender-based differences like this are also there, both structurally and functionally. Okay, some theories are also there and based on performance. Why sometimes, compared to the men or compared to women, men perform better in, especially in some sports, for example. There could be the respiratory context to that as well. So in an article I was reading, it was briefly mentioned that in terms of physical performance, especially when they're doing workout or for the athletes, there seems to be less blood flow going to the leg muscles in women. Less amount of blood flow going to the leg muscles in women. Because they're pushing more, they're using more of their blood flow for respiratory system to function. So lesser and lesser flow probably is dedicated towards the leg muscles, which are requirement for in the athletes for their movements. So this could be one possibility, but I don't think this was proved. But the idea is that because they have a smaller or narrower, smaller lungs and narrower air spaces, they may spend more blood flow for running the lungs. Okay, but thereby compromising on sending the blood to the other parts of the body during performance. Okay, this theory is need to be tested, but these type of theories I've seen in the research articles. So depending on the question demand, if they ask you to focus on the gender-based differences in respiratory system, okay, highlight these type of components. Okay, so these are some examples of gender-based differences. We talked about age-based differences in respiratory function, gender-based differences. I also explained you briefly what is respiratory function. There are also other components that we are going to talk in the next class. Okay, next unit, where we'll talk about the respiratory function in different human populations, especially those people who live in the higher altitudes. Highlanders, we call them highlanders. Hypoxic conditions, how do they behave? How do their respiratory system differs, like hemoglobin content wise, lung capacity wise? Okay, those we're going to talk in the next unit, but for now, so we covered only the gender based and age based differences. So highlanders, so some populations which live in the high altitude regions tend to have differences in few aspects. Not only hemoglobin, we'll talk about some particular categories of enzymes. They do differ in few people, few groups of populations which tend to live on the higher altitudes, like Tibetans, for example. Okay, people who live on Andes, so mountaineers. So those people actually tend to have slight different variations, which I'm going to cover in the ecological anthropology part. Okay, so next we're going to move on to pulse rate. How does pulse rate differ? The next part, last but second part here, is pulse rate. So we talked about respiratory function. Now we talk about pulse rate, and then sensory perceptions we'll discuss about. So pulse rate. What is pulse rate? So pulse rate is nothing but the rate of heartbeat. Rate of heartbeat. So number of times heart beats per minute is heart rate, which is nothing but the pulse rate. Only thing is, it is easily felt at pulse. The heartbeat can be easily felt at pulse. Do you know why? Sunil, I'll start with you and then I'll ask Shweta, if you are there, can you answer this question? I think probably I was focusing too much on Sunil. I just wanted to ensure that non-biology students are following this, okay? That is why I'm asking this first non-biology students and then people of background. Shweta, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Can you answer this question? Why do we actually measure the heart rate at pulse?
Maybe that vein is directly connected to the heart. I don't know.
Very directly connected to the heart. Okay. Logic is correct, but conceptually you need to know something more. So any of you biology students?
Because it is the heart pumping, not going back to the heart.
Arteries. So what are we trying to feel here is arteries. Artery is what carries blood from heart. Veins carry blood back to the heart. So we are not interested in feeling veins, but arteries. And arteries are usually hidden. Arteries are not actually exposed. Arteries are usually hidden, but only few parts of our body where arteries are easily seen. Okay, so pulse, this wrist is one such region. Wrist and also at the behind the neck region, you can feel the arteries better. So every time blood pumps it, there is a movement in the arteries, which is what you are measuring in the pulse. Okay, so pulse rate is nothing but the heart rate, which is measured by pressing the fingertips against certain points on the body, most commonly at the wrist area, neck region, even on the temple area of the face, you can feel that. This is where we have arteries exposed. Okay, right. So this is what is pulse rate. So how does pulse rate vary? Do you see variation with respect to age? Let's have a look at that. So what is a normal pulse rate for us, for healthy individuals? How many times does heart beat?
72.
120.
72, right? Okay, so don't confuse with the blood pressure. Blood pressure is different, correct? So here we are talking about number of times heart beats. Pressure is what is felt on the arterial walls. Okay, here we're talking about number of times heartbeats. I think 72 times we normally say in healthy adult, which may vary from 60 to 100 depending on different components. 60 to 100, otherwise 72 times per minute. So adults 18 years or older, maybe 60 to 100 beats per minute as per the American Heart Association. And a children between 6 to 15 years old, 70 to 100 beats per minute. You know, the infant and even the fetus, how many times do their heart beats? Lesser or more times than this 72 times or up to 100 times? What is the heartbeat in infants and what is the heartbeat in even in the fetus? Because this is one observation that they make when you meet the gynecologist. during this process. So how many times does it beat approximately in infants or in fetus?
More breathing rate, so it should be more than ours.
More, right? About 150 times, sometimes 150, 160 is common beats per minute. Okay, definitely, because the heart is small, size is small, it has to pump multiple times. So it beats multiple times because if every time it is pumping, every time it is beating, it is pumping the blood, right? So children tend to have higher heartbeat, higher rates of heartbeat, whereas a well-trained athletes, they tend to have lower heartbeat. So trained people tends to have 40 to 60 beats per minute. That is why they say that cardiac exercises, they can keep your heart better because it gets adjusted to that pumping, that strenuous pumping that have, you train it. So for them, for athletes, it beats actually very, very low. I heard even much lower for some people who are very well trained, 40 to 60 beats per minute. So you train the heart better, okay, they tend to have lower heartbeat. And comparatively, women tend to have faster pulse rates than the men. Relatively, women tend to have faster pulse rates than men, which kind of correlates with what we discussed in the respiratory system, right? Respiratory also, they tend to have higher side, on the higher side for respiratory rate, same with the pulse rate. So pulse rate does change over a period of time, like sometimes because of exercise. When you do workout, to satisfy the energy requirements of the body, what happens? Heart pumps more blood. So heart beats faster to catch up the oxygen requirement in the body, right? Because oxygen is pulled by the lungs, supplied by the heart. So we need both. Blood pressure goes up when you do workout. Okay. Also, certain conditions like infections. When we go through infections, when you go to doctors, what do? They hold your pulse and feel it. Our pulse goes up, pulse rate goes up when we go through infection, when we have dehydration, stress, anxiety, and certain heart conditions. They can all affect the pulse. That is why, so for doctors, it is a good diagnostic tool. By feeling the pulse, they can tell what's happening. Okay. So traditionally, we know this. I think in traditional medicine also in India, we notice that pulse is the major factor that they use, major observation that they use for determining the problem in the given patient. Probably I've heard about few terms related to this. Okay, with respect to the change in pulse rate, if someone's heart rate is below 60, that condition is called bradycardia. Bradycardia. Bradycardia, where heart beats less than usual. Bradycardia. Okay. What is the opposite word for bradycardia? Tachycardia, which is known as tachycardia. Opposite is tachycardia. Tachy, tachycardia. Okay, where heart beats more than usual. This could be because of multiple factors, certain medications or issues related to heart, okay, exercise. This could be the reasons for that. But age-wise, what type of effects do we see age-wise in the heart function, in the pulse rate and the heart functions? So as we age, with age, what happens? Heart tends to enlarge slightly. With age, heart tends to enlarge slightly. So some amount of enlargement can be seen in the heart. And also they develop thicker walls. We have, heart is like chambered structure, right? Heart is a chambered structure. So we have 4 chambers, correct? And there are walls between them. And these walls become thicker. So heart tends to enlarge and the walls between these chambers become thicker, overall increasing the chamber size. Okay, so with age, what happens? In a way, this is also seen as the component of loss in elasticity. So the main reason here, in the reason behind increasing the size of this is because of the increase in size of heart muscles, because heart is a muscular structure. Heart is mainly made up of muscles. So because of the increase in heart muscle structure, the size of that heart also increases. Size of it, or size of the heart muscle increases, plus stiffening. They become more stiff. They become more stiff and less elastic. So what happens? They become less elastic. Mechanical problems, heart failures. That is why when we age, one, because of sedentary lifestyle and the food habits that we have, usually we tend to block arteries carrying blood to heart. Our stroke is also common problem with age, right? So here in stroke, what happens? What is the difference between heart attack and stroke?
Blood clot, heart, stroke is in brain and
Right.
heart
So
attack.
blood supply, if it is lost to the heart, it gives rise to heart attack. And blood supply, if it's lost to the brain, so no blood supply to the brain, it results in the stroke. So and then we don't receive, part of the brain doesn't receive the energy. So oxygen, no energy, thereby dying. That is why few parts of our body give up. If right side of the brain actually doesn't gets damaged, left side of the body we lose control of. Like that, damage to the brain happens. So we notice that with age, this heart pumping capacity decreases, one elasticity of that decreases, muscle strength decreases. So thereby what happens? It results in several these conditions, medical conditions in elderly people. Leading to things like heart failure, heart attacks, and strokes, etc. Not only with the heart structure, but also same thing with the blood vessels, our arteries, which carry the blood from heart to the other parts. Arteries are smaller versions of arteries are called arterioles. So even they undergo changes. They become more thicker. They become thick and expand. They expand and lose elasticity. They become less flexible. So if they lose elasticity, what happens? Because of quick movements, if you tend to suddenly stand up, move, you tend to faint, I tend to fall down. Because what happens? The blood pressure cannot get adjusted quickly. So elderly people, when they try to actually stand up or quickly want to get up from the resting position, they feel dizzy. That is because your blood pressure is not able to adjust quick enough because of the loss of elasticity. Sorry. The dizziness can be seen. So age-wise, abnormalities with respect to the functioning of heart muscles or heart blood vessels and heart can be seen here. Also, the functioning of the heart, like electrical activity, because heart is a pump, right? So with aging, what happens? There is a lack of or loss in electrical activity or communication between the muscles. So that is why pacemaker, you heard about pacemaker? You know what does pacemaker do in the heart? Pacemaker.
Yes.
What is pace?
Give some shocks.
Gives some shock.
Maintains the
Electrical
pressure.
activity. Sorry?
Maintains the pressure.
Maintains the pressure. Actually, maintains the blood flow. Pace means flow, rate at which blood is flowing. Of course, correlates with the blood pressure. But the pacemaker is pace means speed, pace bowler, pacemaker, something that maintains the pace. It's electrical activity. Basically, muscles, because of electrical impulses, so they cause the contractions and relaxations in the heart. So this we have what is called sinoatrial node, which is called natural pacemaker of our heart, present on the upper part of the heart, upper chamber, in the upper chamber. So which initiates the impulse in the muscles to pump blood. Okay, so even their function decreases. That is why sometimes you are that they put artificial pacemakers. When the ability to control the blood flow is lost with aging, they put artificial pacemakers. Okay, that is why with age, what happens? Heart functioning decreases. Various components in the body connected to the circulation, like blood vessels, also are affected here. So with aging, our performance also decreases. In Unit 10, we'll talk about the aging factors, aging theories, aging factors. These are some of the ideas that you require for that part. But overall, I think age-related effects can be felt, can be seen with respect to the heart function. Okay. And in case of women, if you see the gender wise, also age wise effects are felt in both men and women. But women also tends to have slightly different experience with respect to this. Okay, menopause, especially menopause in women, can cause palpitations, like feeling that heart is beating more than usual. These are called palpitations. And menopause like conditions in women result in these palpitations. Same as what we discussed before, because of hormonal imbalances related to menopause, like estrogen levels decrease. Estrogen levels decrease. So this may actually put women at slightly higher risk for heart problems and circulatory related problems. Okay, right. So women tend to have faster pulse rates than men. And also women tends to have, because of hormonal imbalances around menopause time, can also result in some abnormal functioning of the heart, placing them more at higher risk factors for heart diseases and circulatory problems. Okay, this is briefly about the pulse rate. How is it connected to the heart function, and the number of times heart beats, the rate, pulse rates, comparison with age and with gender. And also briefly we talked about aging, how does it actually affects the functioning of the heart. Okay, right. So briefly, I think not directly with respect to that, but in the higher altitude region, and also briefly with respect to the tropical climates and the colder climates, how does this blood flow varies? We are going to cover those aspects in the next unit. Okay, tropical climates and cold climates, populations living there. So how does blood flow varies among them with respect to the environmental conditions? So those aspects we are going to cover as part of the ecological anthropology. So you can connect them. You can connect them while you have to give examples under this. Okay, because sometimes I have seen questions that sound as if they're part of it, but which mostly in ecological anthropology part, like that is what they have put it here. Give a comparative account on variations in hemoglobin levels and respiratory functions in populations living under different environmental stress conditions. If they specify environmental stress conditions, we talk about what we are going to discuss under ecological anthropology. Heat stress, cold stress, and stress related to the height. So hypoxic conditions. How hemoglobin levels and respiratory functions vary there, we are going to discuss that separately in the next class. Okay, right. So this is about the pulse rate part and gender age wise focus that we focused on gender and age here. The last one is the sensory perceptions. sensory perceptions. So 2 examples I'm going to pick here. One is sensing, so taste sensors. We'll take PTC sensing, PTC tasting, and another one vision. I'm going to talk to you about color blindness and ethnic differences related to color blindness. So sense of taste. Doesn't matter whether you talk about skin, whether you talk about smelling, ability to smell, whether you talk about tasting things. There must be some receptors for them. So we have some receptors, specific molecules. If you're smelling something, so you actually have let's say you're smelling a perfume. So perfume is a chemical. That perfume is actually reaching your nose, and within the nose you have some sensors. So this chemical molecule binds to that receptor. That is when you start recognizing it as so and so. In the past, you might have seen that this is certain perfume, right? Your brain can recognize that, but for brain to recognize, you have to have this receptor sitting in your nose. So the sensitivity to various things differ based on what receptors you have, like humans versus dogs. So dogs tend to have higher amount of, I think if I remember right, 250 times more receptors that dogs have in their nose compared to humans. So dogs are good sensors with respect to the smell, correct? They can smell better. So sniffer dogs, normally we talk about, they have more receptors than what do we have. So they have higher sensitivity to smells compared to us. But doesn't matter, irrespective of this, either you are smelling something or tasting something, we must have receptors which are sensitive to that chemical or that component. And sometimes they both probably work together. Sense of smell also contributes to the taste perception. Correct? We notice that almost on a daily basis. Am I right? If you smell the food better, it will taste better. Have you noticed it? If food actually smells better, it tastes better. That is what they say. So there seems to be some collaboration between the taste, smell receptors and the taste receptors. Also, in addition to that, we can actually sense texture of the food. Rough, smooth, the texture of food. Sometimes you say it, right? Certain foods you like with respect to its texture. You want certain foods to be really soggy or smooth, and some foods you want it to be a bit more crispy. So we have tactual senses in the mouth that actually deals with this. Okay. Plus imagine, how do you sense pepper when you eat chili, green chili? You must have sensors that are binding to these components that are part of the pepper. So like that, we have specific receptors in our mouth, in our nose, recognizing them or detecting them. So this is a biological function. This is a biological function that we are talking about here. Okay, let's see what type of differences that we may notice in the sensing ability. For this, I think one example that we already talked about. Remember, we discussed PTC tasting, Mendelian characteristics in humans we talked about. Have you remember this example? PTC tasting a chemical called PTC. PTC is a phenyl thiocarbamide. We have done problem on this PTC tasting. From Stein and Rowe book, I've given a problem on this PTC tasting. So PTC is a chemical called phenyl thiocarbamide. Phenyl thiocarbamide. So we have alleles for that. Capital T meant for tasting. Small t meant for non-tasting. So it's a Mendelian character. Capital T are tasters. Capital T, small t are
Carriers. Carriers.
carriers. What are they carrying? Tasting ability. There is no carrier concept here. This is not
Oh, they can taste, sir. They can taste.
They can taste. Very good.
Yes.
So they can taste. So heterozygous, because capital T is dominant allele, tasting is dominant character. So what about the non-tasters? What type of genotype they have, Preeti? Non-tasters have what type of genotype?
Small t, small t.
Correct. Very good. Small t, small t. So this is a Mendelian character, capital T, capital T, capital T, small t for tasting, small t for non-tasters. Okay, there's a gene that codes for this receptor. Okay. So you can cite this example for tasting. PTC testers, I think we talked briefly about a theoretical condition. So PTC testers. But PTC is an artificial chemical, right? So why are we worried about it? Because it's an easy way of testing our tasting ability. And also PTC, although is a bitter, similar taste, similar compounds are found in many other foods that we eat. So PTC is not found in nature, but its detection correlates with our ability to taste something that is bitter. Something that is bitter, like coffee, for example, coffee. That bitterness has a similar component as PTC. And also, what is the benefit of tasting things? Is there any use to us other than eating foods that taste better?
And to avoid what not.
Exactly. Avoiding toxins. Toxins tend to be bitter. Toxins tend to be bitter. So people who have these alleles can avoid those toxins, whereas non-tasters unfortunately don't have that advantage. So tasters can avoid toxic because as soon as they try to taste it, it tastes bitter, so they cannot handle it anymore. At the same time, there's too much of sensitivity to do bitterness can also select dietary preferences. Some people tend to eat the foods that are not too bad in the taste for them. So what happens if people are too sensitive to the taste, they may leave out some fruits and vegetables which are healthy for us. So bitter tasting fruits, bitter tasting vegetables, so may cause some problems. So here non-tasters get benefited, tasters are at disadvantage. So in the context of toxins, tasters have advantage. In the context of dietary preferences and meeting nutritional requirements, non-tasters are at advantage. Okay. Also, they say that some non-tasters, they don't actually avoid eating some goitrogens like cabbage, cauliflower. So these type of foods, what do? They can also act like anti-cancer. So what happens? So if you are too sensitive to that, people may not eat it. Tasters may not prefer it, but non-tasters get benefited from that. So like the disease conditions, like these are some implications of tasting and non-tasting. Avoiding toxins, and also some dietary preferences may be modified because of tasting ability, and certain foods which are beneficial like anti-cancerous foods, if people are non-tasters are at great benefit for that. Okay, right. So definitely tasting PTC doesn't have direct correlation with what we do, but there is some correlation that we are picking up here with respect to the bitter foods. Okay, now coming to the PTC part. So are there any differences that we notice? Are there any differences ethnically? Do you notice any differences? So variations in this gene that responsible for this receptor, TAS2R38 gene. I was showing you this gene, TAS2R38 gene. Okay, variations in this gene are seen in the DNA of the ancestors seems to show this as well. So this gene seems to be present and show variation beginning in the hominin line, beginning the evolution of humans. So DNA evidences are showing that. So this is an ancestral property in a way, ancestral feature that is found in us. And gender wise, it looks like females are more sensitive to do PTC testing than males. A study done on Nigerian women has shown that females are more sensitive. I don't know if we can generalize that. That is why I mentioned that especially in Nigeria, that they found out that females are more sensitive to PTC than males. Okay. If you see within India, I think tasters are more common. The frequency of the taster allele, there is a distribution pattern that you notice here with respect to the frequency of this taster allele, capital T allele. It is higher among populations of islands. So in island regions, we find more of tasters. And then north and south, southern part of India. So island regions, if you write the order of how tasters are found, islands, followed by which north and south is where it is more majorly seen, and then it is low in the western side and central side of India. Western India and central India, this seems to be low. As well as tribals, scheduled tribes. Studies have pointed out that. So capital TLE, tasting ability is more common in islanders and then north and south regions, but low in the western India, central India, and among scheduled tribes. Okay. Right. This is an example I wanted to tell you about sensory perceptions. PTC is a good example for this. The next example I would like to talk to you is the vision related sensation. So carefully observe this image. What is the difference between the top left and top right images?
So the reds are seen as green.
Red is seen as red, is green. This is more like grayish, okay? Yes, it looks a bit greenish here. So red, okay. What about green? What happened to the red color in here, this right side image, and what happened to the green color? Similarly here, this color pattern has changed. This red and green is not visible here. Red and green is not visible, at least like red and green. Correct? Some people, because of color blindness, they cannot differentiate. Especially red and green color blindness is a common form, it looks like. So for them, this is how image looks like. For someone who can sense the red color and green color, this is how it looks like. But people with the color blindness, they can only see colors like this because their eyes are not picking up these colors. So mainly the red cannot be picked up here, as you notice here. And here, the different versions, we don't have to know the different versions here, but red and green differentiation is a problem for color blindness people. So the different versions of the color blindness, this version is called red and green color blindness, or sometimes blue. Finish writing that, I'll show you another example here. Red and green color blindness, also blue and yellow. Some people cannot recognize blue and yellow. As you see in the bottom image, bottom right image. So yellow color especially is disappeared here, as you see. They don't see the yellow, and blue is not as what is seen here. Okay, like that, some people actually have color blindness. Did we talk about color blindness in the class? Genetic base of color blindness, did we discuss? We discussed hemophilia, right? We didn't discuss about the color blindness. So color blindness is an X-linked problem. Color blindness is X-linked disorder, X-linked recessive disorder. X-linked recessive disorder. So who is mostly affected? Men are more affected than the females. X-linked, so one defective copy is enough to affect men, whereas in females, two defective copies have to be present to cause the problem. Otherwise, carrier state is seen. So gender-wise differences can be seen here because of the inheritance pattern for color blindness. So women can be either unaffected carriers or affected people, but men have higher tendency, several fold higher tendency compared to the women, because every woman who is a carrier, every woman who is a carrier, and every woman who is affected, their sons tend to be affected from this because they receive the X chromosome, defective X chromosome from mothers. So what happens because of this abnormality? So X-linked, a gene present on the X chromosome is underwent mutation. So because of which what happens? The color detectors in the eyes. Have you read about cone cells and rod cells in the eyes? Do you remember about cone cells and rod cells? Eyes have two specific types of cells, cone and rod cells. Rod cells are meant for seeing in the night time, or it is called low light vision. Whereas cone cells are meant for bright light vision and color vision. So cone cells are responsible for seeing colors, detecting colors. So because of this abnormality in the gene or mutation in the gene, that color detectors are missing in these people. So they are probably missing one form of the color detectors. That is why they are not able to see or pick the pigments, pick the colors. So usually it's not like completely blind to colors, right? As I was showing you, some people cannot see green, red. Some people cannot see yellow, blue. So like that. So it's a Mendelian character. Okay. So some people have trouble distinguishing the shades of red and green. Imagine what happens to them if they have to use traffic lights. Right? That would be one impractical implications I can see here. So there seems to be some ethnic variation with respect to the color vision deficiency in the boys who are mostly affected, color vision deficiency in boys. Some studies have shown that Caucasians are at 5.6% risk. 5.6% it is seen in Caucasians. So Caucasians seems to be more affected than Asians. Asians are at 3.1% compared to Hispanics, Spanish speaking men, 2.6%, and blacks about 1.4%. So ethnic variation can also be seen in color vision deficiency. And this being highest in Caucasians and lowest in blacks, black males.
Sir, won't they have easily figure out the traffic lights? Because anyway they are in order.
Sorry, I didn't get it.
That is a design
They
solution.
have made it in an order, so I don't think they have a problem like red, yellow, and then green.
Yes, they cannot see what the color that's supposed to see, but they see which light actually is shining. And of course, they can follow the crowd too, right? If they follow rules. Yes.
Also, the traffic lights are designed keeping this in mind. So more recently, they've also introduced sound and pictorial representation in the traffic lights to make it easier for
You're right.
color blindness.
You're right. Yes. So I was just joking. I just wanted to tell that this is where we probably can see the problem. Are picking vegetables. What color vegetables? Ripened ones and unripened ones. Right? So yellow ones are green ones. What are you picking? So yeah. I actually had a colleague when I was doing my research. We had a colleague when we were presenting data. He could not see the green color and red colors. And my supervisor used to pick him. Whenever there was a red and green color, I used to ask my colleague, what color is he seeing there? So he's the only person I met myself with color blindness. Otherwise, it's not very uncommon to have color blindness. I think they don't realize it many a times.
Okay, so I happen to be from a design background. So we usually work with developers. And there is an inside joke that most of the developers are colorblind. So we usually use different colors, basically red and green, to indicate status of any particular system. So they don't tend to kind of see that properly, and they code very wrongly many times.
Achha, okay.
And again, even this Caucasian. So I happen to work with Americans on a project, and out of 5 developers, 3 of them were colorblind.
My God. So they definitely have higher incidence of color blindness. Yes. And the one I'm talking about is also Caucasian. I think he's not a European, he's Canadian. Forgot what origin he is from, but yes. Yeah. Right. So what we did in this unit, we actually looked into certain specific sequences that show polymorphism. And how do they vary? How do they vary? Initially, we talked about the variation as population, and then we focused on few features like body fat, pulse rate, hemoglobin, respiratory function, sensory system functioning. We focus mostly on the age-based variations, gender-based variations, and few ethnic-based variations. This is a topic, okay, that we finished this unit here. So, and the 9.6, I think specifically I told you the questions, right? Thrifty gene, HLA, and once they asked respiratory function, short note on respiratory functions, okay, and ABO blood group system and its role, and they asked about genetic markers in general and their use, okay, RH blood group. So these are the ones which are commonly asked. The first few ones, ABO blood groups, RH blood group, and then they asked respiratory functions, HLA, and Thrifty genotype. So they've not asked too much on the actual genetic markers so far in the exam, which is good because it's more of factual data. So, but just remember the brief explanation that you have written in the class. Okay. So I'm thinking of today's discussion that I have done, respiratory function and the pulse rate, that I'm going to share with you. Also, I forgot to send you, I was trying to tweak the information on ABO blood groups, like paternity, the tables I was showing you. I'm also going to share those things with you. Okay, so this brief idea should be enough for this part because not too many are being asked. So I think that should be enough for us for 9.6. So next, in the next class, in tomorrow's class, I'm going to start with the 9.7, ecological anthropology we are going to begin with. Okay, right. Yes, I didn't manage to send you papers. Nice. So yesterday I had to come to Hyderabad, so didn't have enough time. But today I put this slot for getting your papers done tonight. So most likely I'll finish them tonight. I can send them. Okay. So otherwise, I think tomorrow is Friday, right? So Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday you're writing the exam. Okay. Right.
So just to have an idea, how long more do you think will take to finish? Since the
it's today's 4th, right? Is it 4th today?
Yes.
It's 4th. I think we are going to ecological, epidemiological anthropology are not too much. So next 2 units will be done because today is Thursday. So Friday we are beginning. So This week we'll finish 9.7 as well. So beginning of next week we'll finish 9.8. Okay, so end of the, sorry, let me open the calendar. Right, so next week we should be done with the epidemiological anthropology. 8th and 9th we should be done with epidemiological anthropology. Growth will take a bit of time for us. So end of the next week we'll wind up unit 10. Unit 10 the week after, so we should be done with the, so by the week about 16th or 17th of February we should be done with the 11th and 12th part. Okay, so leaving us with the 2 units, racism and fossils. So the week after that, so that is the 4th week, 3rd to 4th week, we should be done with the racism part as well as the fossils part. So we should be able to wind it up before the end of the month at the rate that we are doing it. Okay, because next 2 units are small, we'll quickly finish. You have to spend a bit more time on the 10th. But unit 12 also we covered a few aspects already. Unit 12 part of it is already done, like genetics part, genetic counseling, pattern diagnosis, DNA technology. So a couple of topics are done. So mostly it is the 3-4 topics that we need to deal in applications of anthropology. Mostly forensic anthropology is a key one. The remaining are very simple and factual. Okay, but fossils is the next one where we need to spend a bit more time. I think we should be able to wind it up. We'll get a picture. I think next week we should be get these units done. So by the end of 3rd week, we should get most of the topics done, leaving the last part, fossils part. Okay, fossils also, I believe we need about, I think together 1.5 and 6, we need about four sessions. Okay, so about a week. So we should be able to wind it up this month. Okay, right.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, guys. Have a good night. So we'll have class tomorrow at 4 o'clock.